I'm Nathan Ponchard, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the 2022 Volkswagen Caddy 5 Life Maxi Diesel. As the name suggests, being called Caddy 5 would imply that it's the 5th generation Caddy, and that's exactly what it is. Yet this time, it is a completely new car, even though it looks kind of like a Volkswagen Caddy, right? There's two sort of parallel lines. There's the Caddy Cargo, which comes in three models. It comes in the Caddy Cargo Maxi, and the Caddy Maxi Crew Van, which has seats in the back. And this is in the people mover side of things. So we have the Caddy Maxi, the Caddy Life Maxi, which is what we've got here, and then the Caddy California, which is coming in early 2022. This Life here is the top spec long wheelbase model, which means it gets a few little sort of nods to luxury, like having color-coded bumper bars. It has adaptive cruise control sensors here. These are just the halogen lights, which are apparently trick for halogen, but you can also option LED lighting over and above that. Here we have 17-inch alloy wheels, which are standard on this car, although you can go to 18s if you really want. These Continental Eco Contact 6 tyres are also low rolling resistance for efficiency in the new Caddy Maxi, and I should point out that this is also the most aerodynamic van of its type in the world, with a 0.30 drag coefficient, which in the 80s would have been world beating, but is still pretty impressive for something that has mirrors as big as this. Along the side here, you might think it looks exactly the same as the old Caddy, and you could be forgiven for thinking that, but there are a few little differences. These front wheel arches sort of blister out very slightly, helped by this sort of little scallop in the front mudguard here to make it look like it's doing that. It also has another scallop along the side here, spanning its 2970mm wheelbase. That's just how long wheelbase this Maxi version is. We have the scallop continuing along the doors here. Volkswagen says this door is lighter than it used to be to make it easier to slide in and out, although in this car it is all manual. I do like this little cool strip along here, even though it's just utility, but it looks cool. We've got black roof rails here on the top as well, which raises the height of the car to 1836mm. So it's not a small vehicle, this. It's a box on wheels, but a useful box, as we shall discover. And the back here, I think, is the piece de resistance for the Caddy. It has a really cool tailgate that looks like a baby version of a transporter. These lights that extend up in the side here are sort of nicely scalloped and look pretty cool. This glass that runs down here is also nice and flush, and we have Caddy written in lettering across the bottom to say this is definitely the latest model. While standing down the back here, I should point out that the one crucial difference between the Caddy 5 and the old Caddy 4 is that it rides on the MQB platform that debuted under the Golf 7 in 2012, but in this case now has a completely new rear suspension. So gone are the old leaf springs, but it still has a beam axle, but it now has coil-over shocks, it has trailing arms, and it has a panhard rod to hold it together. So it's all actually quite sophisticated for a van, and means it does transform the way the Caddy drives. Now, one of the reasons why you would buy a vehicle like the Caddy 5 is here. It is because it is shaped like a box in that it gets maximum utility inside. Now this is, you clip that forward and it holds up. It's 446 to 629 litres according to the specs. So I'm not quite sure what's below the luggage cover and what's not, but all I can tell you is this behind the third row is huge. And look how low the loading lip is. It's barely knee height. This is all about making a car sort of maximum usability. We even have lights embedded in the tailgate here to light up your little tailgate party. A proper grab to pull the boot down so you don't have to get sort of dirty fingers all over here. And then we have a pair of third row seats here that flip forward into the floor, or that can be removed altogether. So if you remove the third row, the two seats here, and the three in the middle, there's over 3,000 litres of boot space in this thing. So it's a van with seats, but it's also a good people mover, as we shall discover. As you would suspect from looking at the Caddy outside, inside is huge. The new generation Caddy 5 does bring a lot more tech in the interior than it had before. Whether or not that's all something you really want or not, it's kind of too bad, that's what you're getting anyway. So it does inherit some of the things out of the Mark 8 Golf, and that includes this touchscreen in the center here that is a bit of a love it or hate it kind of thing. It's based around minimizing all the controls, leaving just sort of 2 or 3 exposed. We've got climate here that you hit there, which you've got to touch before you can then change all the temperature and stuff. And you also have driver assist, which you can use to turn off some of the safety stuff, which you can also do through the buttons here in the pack in front. But I feel like it just doesn't quite hit home that sort of speed of what you would have done before. I'm sure anyone who loves playing with screens will like this, but for the rest of us, I kind of wish that there was just still some exposed control edge. Although at least it does do the air recirculation thing here when you're driving along, which means you can hit that quickly. But then that brings up the climate screen, which then you've got to check to see whether it's engaged, and so on and so forth. Now, it does have wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It has only 6 speakers apparently, but it seems to have a really good sound. Certainly in modern music, sounds really great in this massive box of a cabin, and I like that. It doesn't have wireless charging, but it does have 2 USB-C ports down here. It does have a 12-volt outlet here. Inside here, there isn't one, but this is the world's greatest armrest as per all the Golfs for the last 10 years, which I absolutely love. Should also point out we have an ashtray here, which is actually an ashtray. You can even butt it out and, yeah, or put lollies in it. But we also have a 12-inch plug up here, which brings me to the storage in the Caddy. This is really what this car is all about. It has this massive tray, albeit not lined, but just massive, that runs all the way along the dash here. That's deep here and has even another bit in front of the driver that looks like it maybe for a head-up display on some model somewhere. And above us here, we also have roof storage that goes sort of, God, like almost elbow deep there, with a lip here to stop things from sliding out, which is also really great. In the door here, I can easily fit that or a 1.5 litre bottle, but I could also fit other bottles in there. And thanks to the Skoda heritage at Volkswagen, we have one of the Skoda's little rubbish bins. It looks like perfect for chewing gum that you're going to eat after you've been ashing in the ashtray. This spec here though, the Life, isn't quite to production spec. It should have the full digital cockpit pro here. It should have keyless entry and start. It should have rear tinted windows. It should actually have adaptive cruise, which this one doesn't have. But everything else that's in here is relevant to this model, which means, you know, a leather wrapped steering wheel. We have the nifty little controller out of the Golf 8. We have the armrest that I mentioned before. We have these terrific seats with full crank handle height adjustment, and we have the same over here on the passenger seat, and just a general aura of comfort. We also have electric driver's lumbar adjustment over here on this seat, but what we don't have is that sort of squidgy expense that a Golf has led us to believe is kind of a Volkswagen-ish standard. This is a commercial vehicle after all, but happens to be also a good people mover. So all of these plastics here are rock hard, imprinted with a kind of a mixture of like a skin print and a digital print underneath it, plus another print here, plus a digital print here. I feel like just don't look at it too much, then you won't kind of be irritated by sort of the weirdness of textures. But it does the job, which is all about seating people in maximum comfort with maximum utility. One of the chief reasons why you'd buy a car like this Caddy 5 Life Maxi is right here. This middle seat here is just a 3-position bench, but it's essentially shaped like it's 3 buckets. And I would go out on a limb by saying that I think the center seat is actually marginally more comfortable than the outer pair, which makes this such a rarity in a modern car. There isn't fore-aft adjustment. The seat is fixed in place, certainly where we are now. We do have a 12-position backrest, which you can access via these little tabs on the side here, but I'm sort of pretty much in the sensible upright position. Here is the maximum you can go. I've got an enormous amount of headroom here, a reasonable amount of knee room sitting behind myself, although not a heap, but then you do sit high, so your legs drop down low, which means it's more about that than about that. We also have this cute little sort of tray table that I was typing on a laptop before. Not the most sturdy thing in the world, but it can take a little coffee, which is kind of cute. We have one on both sides. We also have a little pair of trays here where you can put your phone or devices on the backs of both seats, plus a map pocket on the bottom of both seats, which is pretty cool. We have a pair of air vents in the middle here, which is really the only air vents going back. You're reliant upon those, or an optional one that you can get in the roof that distributes front air to the back rather than having dedicated ventage back behind us. We have a pair of USB-C ports in here as well, and we have this lump that has nothing on it. We also have no roof grabs. So I think the one thing that's missing from the Caddy is that in the front you have grabs built into that little storage ceiling section, whereas here we don't really have anything. We've just got an armrest to hold on to and a door bin, which isn't actually quite big enough to fit anything beyond a squeezed in 1 litre bottle. It's really just about a 600 ml and a few other bits and pieces of stuff. I should also point out that when you open and close the door, which you do via here, it's all manual. And when you fully open it, you really need to be quite definite in getting it open, or it'll just gradually start sliding closed. Now let's get in that row. So to access the third row in the Caddy 5 people mover, we have the seats set up for left-hand drive here. So the single seat is actually on the road side in Australia, and the dual seat on the other side is on the curb side. So I'm getting in from the curb side. It requires a 2-movement thing. You need to pull the backrest adjuster here to drop the seat down, and if I've done it correctly, I grab this and the whole thing tips forward, so I can climb in here very, very easily to these seats, which I've got little handles here to pull this down, and top tethers. This one's missing them on the outside, but there should be 3 in the full production version. And I'm sitting here in what is surprisingly comfortable. It is sort of knees up Mother Brown. I am sort of sitting like I'm in the front of a football photo, but I should sit like this. And I should point out that there is a cup holder there, and there's cup holders here. There's probably more cup holders here than there is in that row. But we have this sort of elevated seating, so each row gets higher and higher, and here I do have less headroom, but there's still kind of like that much above me at 5'10", and I have the view of the century. Riding on that coil sprung back axle, so it's nowhere near as horrendous as it used to be. We also have a stereo speaker back here, which is here, but these little dual cone things look like they're just gonna gather a lot of dust over time. And if you're sick of all this stuff and don't want all the seats in place, you could potentially have 2 children in this back row here and remove these seats to have this sort of almost like camping quality of travel, like you're in an old combi, which I think is kind of cool, because there is top tethers in this row as well. Should point out though that while these seats are really easy to pop down, they just clip that there, goes into the floor, and you can lift it out, of course, if you don't want it in here. Once you've sat in here, getting this seat back up is not quite so easy. You need to pull this tab here, grab the backrest, and pull it back into place, which is not that hard for me, but might be a little bit difficult for little kids. The combined fuel consumption figure for the Volkswagen Caddy Maxi diesel is 4.9 litres per 100 kilometres. However, we average 6.9 litres per 100 kilometres. Volkswagen's warranty for the car is 5 years or unlimited kilometres, and the scheduled servicing is every 12 months or 15,000 Ks, with the 5-year cap price amount being $2,731. Over the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer paid $899 to comprehensively insure a new Volkswagen Caddy. However, everybody's situation is different, and your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, how you garage your car, and your driving history. Now, before I talk about the driving of the Caddy Life Maxi Diesel, I probably should point out how much it costs, which is $52,640. That is $2,000 more than the turbo petrol version, and $4,500 more than the equivalent normal Caddy Maxi, which isn't the Life car, which means it doesn't have the alloys and some of the other equipment stuff that makes this a little bit more livable. Now, in terms of what the mechanics are in this car, it is Volkswagen's well-known 2-litre turbo diesel 4-cylinder. In this case, it has been massaged to meet the latest emissions, so it meets Euro 6D, and it also has twin AdBlue injection, which is like post-combustion injection into the exhaust to make it super clean, which is nice for a diesel. It produces 90 kilowatts from 2,750 to 4,250 RPM. So that's a really broad span of power for a diesel, and its torque is 320 Newton meters from 1,500 to 2,500 RPM. So that's also really good for a diesel, and it does feel very drivable. It's backed by a 7-speed dual clutch transmission, and it drives through the front wheels, and it does a really respectable job of hauling the Caddy Life Maxi around, because this is not a small car. It's nearly 4.9 metres long. It weighs 1,740 kilos. So all of that grunty torque really works in the Caddy's favour. As for the way the Caddy drives, I suppose I should start by pointing out that this driving position is excellent, and my vision ahead is outstanding. This is true driving in a fishbowl kind of driving, which is exactly what these sort of passenger versions of these vans are known for. Like, you get an amazing view of the world, and I love that. And it, as I pointed out earlier, it gets better each row you go back. But this is definitely a more comfortable seat than the middle seat. The steering in the latest generation Caddy 5 has been adjusted, Volkswagen said, to make it quicker. So as we're turning into this roundabout here, it really doesn't need that much lock to turn in. And while it has such a long wheelbase, it does still have a reasonable amount of point in corners. In fact, you can get into a really nice rhythm in the Caddy by just treating the fact that it is quite a heavy car, braking cleanly into a corner. You can add power pretty early. It really manages to punch itself out of a corner well. It feels stable and planted with a little bit of an understeer bias in its balance. But I think that the harder you drive it, the more it levels out into being quite a neutral car to drive with all of that lovely torque. The ride quality is surprisingly absorbent for what I was expecting. Older Caddies always felt like they were two different cars that were put together. The front suspension of a more modern car and the leaf-sprung rear suspension from someone's horse and cart from 1910. Whereas now we have technology that seems to be holistic in this MQB platform with the coil-sprung new rear end and all that stuff. It does give this Caddy 5 a level of cohesion in the way that it drives, because it does drive really quite well. It isn't sporty or super supple or some of those things that maybe some of the French types of this vehicle have been in the past, but I think the more that you drive it, the greater that its charms come through. Now, riding on this modern platform means that the Caddy 5 also has modern safety assist systems. So it has front AEB with pedestrian and cyclist detection, it has rear cross traffic alert, it has lane keep assist with side collision assist, it has adaptive cruise control in this car, although it's not fitted to this exact model. It also has front and rear parking sensors, it has park assist, and this one also has something called travel comfort assist, which combines with the adaptive cruise and the lane keep and whatever to make sort of highway driving surprisingly pleasant, which is something that this long-legged turbo diesel people carrier is really good at, as you would expect for something from Europe. I suppose the one potential sore point about it, if you had to look at it that way, is that it does cost more than $50,000. You do get a lot of car for the money though, so I suppose you need to look at the Caddy 5 as something that is competing against other 7-seat SUVs even as an alternative to that, because it is a true 7-seater, this car, rather than just being a van with seats, because it finally has a level of polish that means that this could be an effortless everyday all-round car, as well as a workhorse, as well as a family carry-all, and have a little bit of enjoyment while driving it as well, which I think is kind of important in modern times. So it certainly should be. In a world seemingly obsessed with SUVs and small hatches like the Golf even, you might think the Caddy is not such a big deal. But over 4 generations, Volkswagen has sold over 3 million of them globally. And since this car launched in Australia in 2004, Volkswagen Australia has sold over 30,000, with it being the market leader in its category since 2005. In fact, it actually has the highest segment market share of any Volkswagen sold in Australia, which is 70% in 2019. So it's actually a really important car for the brand. Where Volkswagen deserves kudos though, is that they are brave enough to bring in the van with seats, people mover version of this sort of car. Anyone who has travelled in Europe or hired a car in Europe or lived in Europe knows just how well this sort of vehicle works there. And yet Volkswagen is the only brand brave enough to offer their car here, unlike any of the French brands that only do vans, which I think is extremely disappointing. So while that limits your choice to basically just this, it's actually a really good car, and it has a charm that sort of wins you over the more that you drive it, and yet you never forget just how great it is to look out of, how comfortable it is to sit in, and just how much utility is in this car, which is why I kind of secretly love it, but not the colour. If you haven't subscribed, please do so below the video, hit the notification bell and leave a comment on the 2022 Volkswagen Caddy 5 Life Maxi Diesel or on Chasing Cars. Thanks for watching.